6:17 coming around towards 6:18 in Trinidad and Tobago on this Tuesday morning. Very good of you to be with us. Well, it may not be back to normal as we know it, but I suppose there's no normal anymore these days, really. But the resumption of physical classes is a clear indication that we must learn to live with the COVID-19 virus. The Ministry of Education reported a successful turnout of students yesterday, as Minister Dr. Nayan Gadsby-Dolly told several schools. Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, Ttuta, says for the most part, they were satisfied with the COVID-19 safety measures put in place at most schools. Well, let's hear more. Let's get a perspective from Ttuta via their second Vice President, Curla Robertson Thomas. Very good morning to you, Ms. Robertson Thomas. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning to you and your team, and good morning to the public. Thank you for having Ttuta here this morning.
Indeed, there appears to be like a little few seconds delay in our communication, but we'll manage effectively, I believe. Anyway, let's move along. Would it be correct to say that Ttuta was reasonably satisfied or very happy with the way things went or with the activities on the first day of in-person schooling for segment of the secondary school population? If you could just give us that perspective, please.
That would be incorrect. We can't say that we are reasonably satisfied. What I would say this morning is that we continue to monitor. Yesterday was only day one. And of course, with it, as expected, would come some hiccups. We do have some schools that were not able to have school, and we still have some principals trying to work out timetabling to try and accommodate as much students as possible. This is something that we have tried to have discussion about, because the timetabling, I know it has been bandied about and public has much to say. They said that Ttuta said to stop online. Ttuta didn't mean stop online if online is what we were doing, but having to go out, all of our secondary school teachers have now been called out to schools physically. What we said is once you have called the students back to school, that the online needs to cease, because this was emergency operations, one, and two, there is no way that they can actively do both the teaching at school physically and do online. And yes, we understand that a large group of students will be online and expecting to have some interaction. For instance, yesterday we did visit schools as well, and I'm looking at teachers having to do orientation with Forms 1 and Form 2 students in particular, who for some of them, they've not seen the compound, they don't know the layout of their school. And of course, you have to take them through, because if you have to do drills, they have to know the entire school compound, etc., get them up to speed. Then that teacher cannot be expected to teach a group of students who is at home. I have listened to parents trying to indicate that they would be willing, those who can, pay for improved internet, because teachers are trying to use whatever bandwidth is available at school. And in most cases, it's not enough for them to be able to do any kind of streaming. And our general counsel made it very clear. Once our teachers were called out to school, we said, yes, report to school and do your teaching there. It's really not reasonable to think that they will be able to manage both systems. I heard a principal yesterday saying she was trying to figure out if she could let some teachers leave early to get home to go online to teach. The dynamics of that is poor. And we do support education. We did everything in our power to get our teachers to get online and do what they needed to do there. But we're saying now, if you're bringing them back to school, then we have to find a suitable solution so that the children get the benefit of what they need and they're not shortchanged in one way or another. And yes, we also understand that we now have to find ways to deliver the curriculum, given that it's a pandemic. We know that the schools cannot, because some of the problems we encountered yesterday, at one school, there were some children who were not timetabled for school yesterday that turned up to school. Now, once those children get there, the principal has to find a way to accommodate that child or those children. And they're already having a problem in terms of space for the children that they have timetabled for each day to get to school. You can't just turn a child out, because their safety is now in the hands of the principal and the students. So those are some of the things we identified yesterday. There were still some classrooms that had not been cleaned for the start of the day, and children were in the hallways with their teachers, waiting for the MTS to get to the classrooms to have them clean. And not only were they not clean, the furniture had not been spaced out as should be to accommodate them in the room. So there's a lot of teething that will go on in this week in particular that we have to keep our eyes on. Where the isolation rooms are situated, if they have an isolation room, is another concern, and who is going to monitor that room, because if we put a student or students in there, you have to have a body to manipulate and manage those students as well as the ones that you have in the classroom. The primary schools came out, and we have some principals having to teach the standard 5 class because the teachers are either in quarantine or on some particular type of leave. Now, principals do teach and they're doing their job. They've gone on to it, but we have just said to them, you need to let the employer know that you will not be able to respond with dispatch to the multitude of requests for data and information, because you can't now be in a classroom and then try to upload information. You have to choose one, and of course the children will become priority at this time. So those are just a few of the things that we observed. One school I visited yesterday, at minutes to 9, we still had quite a huge population of students standing outside the gate waiting to have the entry protocols in terms of the temperature taking, filling out the forms, etc., dealt with so that they could even enter the schoolyard. And it was being carried out by both the MTS, the dean, the safety officer. Everybody was down there trying to do what they could do to try and get the children into the school with some kind of urgency.
Well, I'm glad, Mr. Robertson, Thomas, that you want to give in a few.
Said a lot.
Because given that what you've just outlined, if you were to give us more, we wouldn't have time to go into all of those different challenges that are being faced. But given those realities, given what you just said, and again, just trying to understand it myself, looking on from a distance about students attending classes in person for at least 2 days a week, that sounds like, if not so much a nightmare, but as far as the coordination and the timetabling of that and the proper proper communication to ensure that that every stakeholder is clearly on board with what is happening and who's supposed to be there and who's not supposed to be there and who's being taught online. Is that communication taking place effectively?
And correct, and that's the problems that we had written to we had asked first to have more discussion with the ministry. We wrote to the CPO as well on the 17th of January and attached a copy of the guidelines asking to have discussion. His response to us on the 2nd of February was in keeping with it's an administrative decision and we should allow. The fact is, we seem to the public as if we just want to stop things. It's not that we want to stop things. We want to have meaningful discussion to work out how best this could work. We all have children. I have a Form 3 student in my home, and it's nightmarish. Yesterday I came home and she said, "Mommy, I didn't have any class today." That's going to be the reality. They had a power outage for part of the day because a breaker was turned off. How are the teachers, even if they are at the school, to stream if they have limited or no access to electricity and or limited data to the students who are home, where they have to find places? When you have a few teachers well at schools, they have to find or use their own data. I have principals asking teachers, please consider using your own data to upload or stream. It really is not a proper fix, and we do understand, all of us as parents, as educators, we want what's best for the children, but you have to meet with us, sit down, and we really have to clearly define how we're going to do this, because I cannot see that it is reasonable to ask teachers to try and skip from home to school to try and do the work that they need to do and plan for the instruction on both levels, because you're planning for a group physically. It's always going to be different from what you're planning for way of a lesson online. In the primary school system, they've said that school is closed on Wednesday, but you want me to come to school Monday and Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, but Wednesday, you expect me to automatically, when your words are the school is closed, to then go home and put lessons on there or deliver. These are things that general people may not understand, but that's not what our job description has in it. That's not what our current terms and conditions have in it. So when the union is saying we need you are interfering with our terms and conditions, you are. Am I working for you at the school that I'm appointed? Am I working for you at home? If we're to do a hybrid situation, we have to have full discussion and everybody has to be clear and we have to sign agreements that this is what we have signed up to do. You cannot just impose that on teachers and expect that it will be fully carried out. We've asked for trainings. Yes, they've tried to do some training. We still have some teachers who have not fully grasped totally online. Some of them are actually, we had a number of teachers come to our general council and say, we're willing to go to school. We couldn't wait to go to school, but we also have to make sure that the school is safe. For instance, one of the biggest things Ttuta is concerned about is that the public health regulation still says that there should be 6 feet distancing. But just for schools, we have adopted what the CDC has said about 3 feet. It's not changing the public health regulations, but it's changed for schools. But everywhere else, you're dealing with the WHO, and we've only pulled out that particular piece of legislation from the CDC to allow for 3 feet. And we understand why. Because they will not be able to fit a whole class into a classroom with 6 feet. They're not even being, I looked at some classrooms yesterday, and even with 3 feet, I'm seeing the people are literally still very much close to each other with a classroom that one, because our schools are, most of them are very old, they don't meet all the USH standards. There's one door and it's a sliver of a room to fit about 10 or 11 children in it. And that's one part of the class. So there are a lot of issues.
Ms. Robinson, sorry to interrupt you. We have just a couple of minutes, and clearly there are a litany of issues. Does it again still come down to communication? As far as from whether from the ministry to Ttuta and indeed within the respective school environment, so that everyone is on the same page. Just as a final thought on that, does the problem continue to be the issue of communication?
Yes, that would be a major part in it. And going forward, as you said a while ago, if our parents are not in tune with what the communication is, especially for timetable, we're going to have a problem, because we are responsible for these children, and we would not want children leaving their homes to try and get to school that doesn't exist for them, and then not being able to be properly catered for there because there's no space. That's one. Or ending up in the streets involved in some kind of untoward problem if we're not all on the same page. All of us need to be on the same page.
And as far as that is concerned, just as a final thought, if you could just briefly explain, when there's a meeting with the Ministry of Education and Ttuta is one of the key stakeholders, are there subsequent meetings that take place within various regions, with the respective schools, so that the teaching body and the principal and maybe the PTA are on board with how this is going to be rolled out? Does that actually happen at all?
Not like that. When the minister calls for consultation, if you're invited, Ttuta has had its meeting, and then you're invited to the meeting with all the other stakeholders. Short of that, instructions are given to the school supervisors through the DSS, coming from the PS and the CEO, and then those things are filtered to school supervisors. A lot of the time we have found too, there's different interpretations. So in one district, we may get a certain implementation in a particular way here, and in another district something else. Principals receive their instructions by way of circular memoranda and whatever exists in the Education Act. That's where they take their instructions from. So sometimes the interpretation may be different, and a lot of the times the principals themselves have not been properly trained to monitor a system that they want to introduce, but then they're expected to supervise that very system at the school. So yes.
Ms. Killer Robertson-Thomas, we thank you very much for taking the time to join and setting it right, because my initial question to you was that Ttuta would be generally satisfied, and clearly there are a lot of issues on the table that remain unresolved even from the very beginning, from the very outset of this pandemic in March of 2020. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to be with us.
Have a good day, sir. Thank you.
You're more than welcome, Killer Robertson-Thomas, because we're going to continue on that focus on the education system in this new environment with more students out of school. Urvashi will take our next interview. But before we go to that break, let's remind you very importantly of those COVID-19 protocols, even more relevant now with more and more students out there in the school environment. We'll take that break, and Urvashi will be right back.